it's Ayam Sirias. I'm going to talk to you about the cost of divorce. And the focus is on divorce in Indonesia. It's pretty easy for me to talk about this as I went through it a few years back, but I only completed the entire process last year, and not without coincidence did I lose my job after that. But more on that later. So let's talk monetary costs first. In my last video, I mentioned costs of living and marriage here in Indonesia. So if you haven't seen it yet, I suggest you go watch it right now. Divorce, like marriage, is quite easy in Islam. Divorce is allowed, but is also conditional. There is no such thing as no-fault divorce laws here or in any other Islamic country I know of. You need a good and specific reason to do it. If the wife refuses you sex for an extended period of time, the man can file for divorce. Yes, sex and regular sex is part of the bargain when you marry. So in Islam, if your wife denies you sex because you were too tired to do the dishes one day, society will not side with her. And although this rule applies to men as well, consider how often husbands deny sex to their wives compared to the other way around. It's no wonder the example given in Al-Quran was written with a male audience in mind, because even back then, they knew it was women that always used their sex as a bargaining chip to get what they wanted. Another example of a justifiable reason for divorce is that if the husband does not support the woman financially, she can legally ask for a divorce. This reason is very unique in that it is gender biased, because the woman does not have to financially support the man, regardless of his current financial condition. Any money that the wife earns on her own merit never has to be shared with the husband or the children. You see, traditionalism demands that a woman's value is in her pussy, a man's is in his wallet. Now, what did it cost me to divorce? Since my wife had no better reason except for the lie that I didn't support her, it should have cost me nothing after all. Even her family refused to believe her bullshit. The bottom line is, while I stayed back in Canada to work to support her, and she chose to come back here, she had an affair with a richer man. The only problem was that when I came back to Indonesia, I tried to fix everything and salvage this 5-year marriage with a son. She eventually just disappeared one day while I was at work with my son and never to return. Now in Islam, if a wife does this, you have a right to file for divorce. But I refused. Instead, I dragged on the torment, trying to get her to come back to me. But it was always a lost cause. I was lucky enough to find marriage counselors in my circles that did the job for free. Because like a hopeless jackass, I thought I could make it all better through my effort. But keep in mind, women find no reward in the effort it takes to fix a broken marriage. Not even women from this country. The first counselor that we met was a Muslim male Indonesian, and my wife walked out of our first session drenched in crocodile tears. After she was gone, the counselor said to me that he was afraid, after everything we had discussed, that she might be in love with someone else. Now, despite my wife's initial protest to a male counselor in the beginning, I abided and I found another counselor, but this time a female, through my mother-in-law, who was obviously in support of me trying to repair this marriage. After our second session with the female counselor, she very matter-of-factly answered this question by the woman counselor.
I understand that you say that you don't love him anymore, but you must have loved him when you were first married. Can you discuss this?
My wife coldly replied by saying this.
I never loved him. I only wanted his child.
And she did this in front of my face. Now let that sink in. Women here will not even flinch about the fact that they wanted a Western male only to have his children for his long nose, pale skin, large penis, and his light hair and light eyes. And it happens a lot, but you will never hear about it because no one here has big enough balls to bring it to the attention in the world media. They want your sperm because they know that the children you produce with your sperm will be a bigger profit for them in the future. Yes, my brothers, your sperm is a universal currency worth more than gold to all these women across the globe within our gynocentric culture. These were all costs of my wife divorcing me. and it cost half my soul, my life, my sanity, and my wallet. But it doesn't end there. Of course, my wife assumed custody of my son because no one here would question that choice. After all, I'm just a workhorse, and I'm just a foreign man. What do I know about raising children, considering all I ever do with my time is break my back to earn money so that they can live comfortably with this multicultural child in her haphazard care? But I did not give up. I chased my son. I forced myself into his life. I found better and better work. But she eventually got a job at a school that I mentioned earlier had already employed me at part-time. And it didn't take long before my 6-month contract was up and they refused to rehire me because my wife was already employed at that school full-time. And this is how it went down. Now, I tried to disregard these conspiracy theories that came into my mind, into why I, as an educated and accomplished teacher at this school, was refused to be rehired onto a full-time contract. But it was worse than I thought, because after that, I used to try and go to events my son had at that school. And every time I showed up, I was greeted with this very obvious disdain from everyone working at the school. I didn't feel comfortable, but it didn't take me long to figure out that she was demonizing me to her mostly female fellow employees to the point that I felt like a Jew walking into a Nazi marketplace in the 1930s Germany every time I went to visit him. And this only got worse until one day, as the Muslims say, Allah smiled upon me, because her shitty attitude eventually got her fired. But it didn't change her employer's opinion of me and the stories that my ex-wife had told to them about me. And then one day I called her in desperation after over 2 weeks of her not answering my phone calls. I then decided to call her school. They said that she had left her job 2 weeks prior, and I panicked. I ran out of my current office, scared to death that she may have left the city or even the country with my son. But thankfully, I found her later asleep in her bed in her tiny little room that she rented in the late morning, having been unemployed for more than 2 weeks without my knowledge, and my son fast asleep at her side. In the end, she had to coalesce with me and the fact that she could not financially support my son on her own. And because she had left me unjustly, according to Islamic law, I was never required to pay support, even though I did anyway. I gave her lots of money because I don't want my son to starve. But like in the West, she never had to legally provide any evidence of what she was actually spending the money I sent her on. Now, this blessing caused her to ask me to take my son while she tried her hand in being employed on the island of Bali, and I agreed. Not even a month later, my son was living with me in my apartment and going to school at the international school that I was employed at, and for a discount. And things couldn't have been better. But that was until I made a huge mistake in trusting her and allowing my son to go to his grandmother's house to spend time with his mother while she had a holiday from work. At this point, she was in Jakarta for a few weeks from Bali, and I felt it was proper for her son to spend some time with her while he could. However, I want to say this outright to all you MGTOW men. One of the reasons I let him spend that unattended time with his mother is because my sympathetic dick had targeted another much younger woman. And the moral of this is women will fuck you any 2 ways to Sunday, regardless of the situation, whether lover, concubine, girlfriend, or wife. Please control your dick. Anyway, to make this long story short, she kidnapped my son back to Bali without my consent or knowledge, while I felt comfortable bedded down with this 18-year-old girl. Obvious regrets are regrettable. And at this point, the open window to my 17th floor apartment became very inviting as a portal to ending it all. But I didn't do that. Instead, I did what most women do. I sat down and I planned for a way to get him back. I spent 1 month planning and working for money to fly to Bali for a visit, all under the guise of a concerned father who only wanted to see his son. I flew there, I saw where they lived, and it was very disappointing, as was the school he was attending. And I took pictures and planned again. And this is where the real monetary cost of my divorce here came into play. I kept planning, and this time with the help of a very expensive lawyer. I planned for another month and made arrangements to go back to Bali again with the idea that I would go back every month just to spend a few days with him. On my second trip, I had earned her trust. She agreed to let my son spend one night at the hotel I was staying at. And actually, on a side note, this was the time I made my first MGTOW videos. In a hotel in Bali, drunk on anger, cheap beer, and utter disappointment. On this second trip with him, at my hotel room, and her trusting me, I snuck away. Like a thief in the night. With the help of a coworker on my side, I packed my things, carried my sleeping son from the hotel, checked out prematurely, and took a cab to the airport to take the first plane back to Jakarta that night. And I have never looked back. Needless to say, she called the following day in absolute distress and tears, as well as confusion, as I had pulled the same trick on her that she had pulled on me months earlier. But who knows, maybe she had some young inviting cock in her own bed that kept her distracted while I made my getaway. But regardless, I never looked back, and I took the time I had with my son to formulate a plan with a lawyer to get full legal custody. I made this happen for thousands of dollars, but the cost did not end there. You see, during this struggle for custody while she was in Jakarta, she had tarnished my name with the school I mentioned earlier, where I was employed part-time before she even arrived. And the international school community here is very tight. And since it is comprised of mostly women, it wasn't long before her lies about me were common gossip among every female teacher at a school in Jakarta within a 100-mile radius. And this eventually bled over to the current job that I had at a different school. You see, while my ex-wife was still in Jakarta, she paid several visits to my school and to the HR department of my school and continued to vilify my name. She did this to the point where HRD never looked at me the same. Yes, women will lie to other women, and all women will believe it regardless of where those women come from. And I was now public enemy number one among the 95% female staff in charge of hiring and firing foreign teachers. This debauchery continued for about 2 years until I made a fatal mistake. I tried to discipline a female student for being disrespectful, and that tiny snowball turned quickly into a monster when it made the ears of this student's rich, privileged mother living off her husband's wealth. And that news hit the HRD department hard, and this ended in my termination. At this time, I was very vocal on YouTube also about MGTOW, and do not dismiss the fact that maybe some of them may have seen my videos, especially the one on the Canadian teacher here in Indonesia falsely accused of raping little boys. It's a long story, and I will put the link below. All of these factors cost me my job. My contract was broken unjustly and against the national law. I was asked by an ally at my school if I would take legal action against the school. But all I could do was basically show my empty pockets after having paid, also unjustly, thousands of dollars for legal custody of my son and basically say, how the fuck could I possibly do that? The sick irony of this entire story was when I retold it to my never-graduated junior high school maid, she replied this:
That much money for divorce and custody? It would only cost me $50.
This is very possible cost of divorce in this country. I know without a doubt there are many similar untold stories by men like me, but because no one here gives a shit about keeping a record, well, we'll never really know the truth. And even my lawyer said the same. Well, that's it for this episode, brothers. Take care. See you again.